I rushed through the door after another long shift, my mind buzzing with exhaustion and a nagging worry about how much longer I could keep up this pace. The aroma of dinner greeted me, but instead of comfort, it just reminded me of everything waiting on my shoulders. My parents were in the kitchen, setting the table, chatting animatedly about my brother Eric's latest big business idea. Eric, the golden child. He sat at the table, leaning back in his chair with that easy, charming smile he always wore, the one that made everyone believe he was on the edge of some breakthrough, even if I was the one who ended up catching him every time he stumbled. I glanced at him, his feet kicked up, relaxed, as if the world would always catch him. Because, well, it always had. That world just happened to be me. Lila, you're home, my mom said, smiling as she served the food. Her tone was too cheery, almost like she was nervous about something. Yeah, work was work, I said, sliding into a seat across from Eric. I hadn't even taken a bite when my mom cleared her throat and started. We're so proud of you, honey. All that you're doing to help out around here, she began, looking at me with that pleading look she reserved for when she wanted something. But we all need to do our part for the family. I glanced up at her, feeling my pulse quicken. I knew where this was going, but I couldn't believe it. Couldn't even bear to hear it. Eric has such a great opportunity in front of him, she continued, her eyes flicking nervously to my father, who nodded along. He's worked so hard on his business plan, and with just a bit of support, it could really take off. Eric's business plans. The last one he had pitched involved cutting edge organic products, and the one before that had been something about an exclusive lifestyle brand. Every plan, every so called big break, was just a new scheme, one he would pour our family savings into, leaving us with even less than before. And every time, my parents backed him like he was their golden ticket. But Mom, I started carefully. I'm already working extra hours just to save for school, remember? I can't. Lila, listen. My dad interrupted, his tone sharper than usual. You'll have your time. Eric needs us now. Family is about sacrifice, right? I couldn't believe it. I'd sacrificed so much already. Nights out with friends, hobbies, even the possibility of applying to schools further away, all because they needed me here to help with bills and make ends meet. And now they were asking me to give up more? Eric leaned forward, his usual grin in place. Hey, Lil, I appreciate it. I just need a little boost, A little extra help to get things started. He looked so sure of himself, as if he wasn't asking me to tear my future apart for the fifth time. What about my future? I asked, finally voicing what I'd wanted to say for years. I've done everything you've asked. I've worked, I've saved, I've supported all of you, and now you're asking me to give up my college fund for another one of Eric's experiments. A tense silence fell over the table. My mother sighed and exchanged a look with my father, and then with Eric. Sweetheart, you're going to have plenty of time for college, she said softly, reaching over as if to comfort me. But your brother, he's counting on us. You wouldn't want to let him down, would you? A wave of betrayal washed over me, stinging sharper than any insult. You're taking my money for his business? Without even asking me? My father crossed his arms, his face hardening. This isn't about asking, Lila. It's about doing what's right for the family. Your brother has potential, real potential, and that's worth investing in. I looked at Eric, who was smirking as if he'd just won some private victory. I felt my hands tremble under the table. They'd already decided. They were going to use my college fund to fund Eric's potential. The future I'd fought for, saved for, sacrificed for, it meant nothing to them. And then, as if I couldn't feel more alienated, I noticed Ryan, my boyfriend, standing quietly in the doorway, watching the whole thing. I hadn't even realized he was here. Part of me felt relieved, like finally, someone was here who would understand. Ryan, I said, feeling my voice shake. You see what they're doing, right? They're taking everything I've worked for, everything we've talked about. He shifted uncomfortably, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I mean, Lila, they are your family. And sometimes you have to, compromise. Help each other out. Compromise. That word felt like a slap. I'd compromised more times than I could count. For years, I'd put my own needs aside, tried to be the dependable daughter, the supportive sister. And now, even Ryan, the one person I thought might actually take my side, was falling into line with them. You knew about this, didn't you? I asked him, feeling the heat rise in my chest, my eyes welling up. You knew, and you didn't tell me. He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. I thought it would be better to wait until they talk to you. I mean, I'm sure they have their reasons. Reasons? I echoed, my voice rising. What reasons could possibly justify stealing my future? Ryan glanced at my mother and father, as if silently asking for their approval. It's just Eric has a lot going for him. You know how it is. Maybe it's worth the sacrifice. Just this once. Just this once. It was like a broken record, everyone telling me to sacrifice, just this once, while it was clear they had no intention of letting it be just once. I couldn't look at any of them, each face a mask of self-justified betrayal. I stood up, feeling as if I might explode if I stayed in that room one more second. Fine, I said, choking on the anger and the heartbreak that knotted in my throat. Take it, take the money, but don't expect me to be here when it's gone. I stormed out, my heart hammering, my vision blurred. In that moment, it felt as if my entire life had been a trap, something I'd only now realized. I had worked so hard to be a part of this family, to make them proud, and in the end, none of it mattered. Leaving home felt like stepping off a cliff with no safety net. For the first time, I had nothing to fall back on. No family, no Ryan. Just the savings I'd managed to keep from their grasp and the drive to prove to myself that I was worth more than the role they'd cast me in. I found a tiny apartment a few cities over and threw myself into work, taking any job I could find to cover rent and keep food on the table. I started in the kitchen of a small, rundown diner, working double shifts, scrubbing dishes, chopping vegetables, anything they needed. It was grueling, but I loved the feeling of being valued, even if it was just for doing the gritty work that no one else wanted to. Over time, I moved from washing dishes to helping on the line, learning how to cook under the demanding eye of the head chef, Luis, who was as tough as he was skilled. He didn't give compliments, but when he called me a quick study one night, I felt a surge of pride. Here, my work meant something. My days turned into a blur of long hours, aching feet, and late-night bus rides home. In those early weeks, the loneliness hit hard. I had no one to come home to, no one to talk to about my day. Some nights, I almost called my mom, half hoping she'd understand why I left and offer an apology. But each time, I'd picture Eric's smug face, Ryan's silence, and the way my parents dismissed me as if my dreams were disposable. I couldn't go back. Over the months, I carved out a small life for myself. I found solace in cooking, in pouring my frustrations into each meal. The kitchen became my sanctuary, a place where I could finally create something for myself. Luis noticed my dedication and started giving me more responsibility, teaching me techniques, and even letting me create the occasional special. It was like he sensed the storm inside me and knew that I needed an outlet. Cooking became my escape, my therapy, the one thing I could control in a world that had felt so out of my hands. Gradually, I made friends, other servers, and line cooks who worked as hard as I did, each with their own story of struggle and resilience. One of them, Sandra, became my closest friend. She was a single mother with 2 kids, juggling her shifts and school, and still managed to keep a smile on her face. Her strength inspired me, and for the first time in years, I felt a real connection with someone. Despite the exhaustion and the occasional pangs of doubt, I was proud of the life I was building. Every time I felt the pull to return to my family, to smooth things over or check in on them, I reminded myself of what they had taken from me, what they had asked me to sacrifice. I couldn't let myself forget, not when this new life was finally starting to feel like it was mine. As the months turned into a year, my hard work started to pay off. Luis promoted me to sous chef, and the small raise meant I could finally afford a few luxuries, like a decent couch and a TV. I had a little savings now, enough that I didn't have to live paycheck to paycheck, and the diner's owner even suggested I might think about culinary school someday. The idea seemed distant, almost impossible, but just hearing it made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I had a future beyond survival. Then one evening, as I was getting ready to close up, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. She kept up the sporadic attempts to reach out, little notes about how much they missed me, how things were hard without me around, and how they were so sorry things got complicated. This message, though, was different. It was a long paragraph, practically pleading, saying that Eric's business had failed, that he was in trouble, that the family needed help. I felt my heart twist, old instincts flaring up, the urge to fix everything, to swoop in and save them like I always had. I could almost hear my mother's voice, the way she'd talk about family loyalty and sacrifice, all while making it clear that Eric's well being came before mine. But this time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt anger. After everything they'd done, they wanted me to step back into the role I'd worked so hard to escape. Still, curiosity gnawed at me, and a small part of me wondered if things had changed, if they truly understood what they had done to me. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them. I told myself it would be for closure, a chance to finally put everything to rest. The meeting was set for a Saturday afternoon at a coffee shop near my old neighborhood. I arrived early, feeling a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. When my parents walked in, they looked older, worn down, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Then Eric strutted in, wearing that same arrogant expression, and the memories of betrayal came rushing back. My mother reached for my hand, her face softening with a look I'd once found comforting. "Lila, honey, it's so good to see you," she said, as if this was just a casual family reunion and not a desperate plea for help. I forced a polite smile, pulling my hand back. "It's been a while." My father cleared his throat, looking awkward, as if unsure how to begin. Eric, of course, had no such hesitation. "Listen, Lil, I'm in a bit of a jam," he started, his tone smooth, as though we were simply old friends catching up. "My business hit some snags. Things just didn't go as planned. You know how it is with startups." I felt my jaw clench. "No, Eric, I don't know how it is. I'm not the one who had a family fund my every whim." He chuckled, as if I'd made some sort of joke. "Come on, don't be like that. I just need a little help to get back on my feet. You've been doing well, right? Got your chef job and all." There it was, the assumption that because I was finally making something of myself, it was my duty to share it with them. My mother jumped in, her voice pleading. "Lila, sweetheart, your father and we're in a bit of a bind because of everything. We thought we could help him get back on track, but we're close to losing the house." My mind reeled, the words washing over me as I tried to process the audacity of it all. They had pushed me aside, stolen from me, left me to rebuild my life from the ground up, and now they were back, expecting me to save them from the wreckage of their own decisions. "I can't believe this," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You still think I owe you? After everything?" My mother's face crumpled, and she reached for my hand again. "Lila, please. We're family. Eric made mistakes, yes, but family looks out for each other. We didn't mean for things to get so complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, incredulous. "You stole my future for him. You took everything I had saved, everything I had worked for, without even asking me." My father shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the table. "We thought you'd understand. Eric needed us, and sometimes that's what family does. They make sacrifices." I let out a hollow laugh. "Sacrifices? I've been sacrificing for years. For you, for him, for this family. And every single time, you've chosen him over me." Eric rolled his eyes, tapping his fingers impatiently on the table. "Come on, Lila. Don't be so dramatic. It's just money. You can make more. We're talking about family here." I turned to him, my voice icy. "Family doesn't betray each other. Family doesn't take without asking. And family doesn't treat one person's life as disposable just because someone else can't handle responsibility." My parents looked at each other, desperation etched in their faces. They realized, maybe for the first time, that I wasn't going to back down, that I wasn't the obedient, quiet daughter they could manipulate into cleaning up their mess. I won't do it, I said, standing up. I'm not bailing you out, and I'm not coming back. My mother reached for me, her face twisted with hurt. Please, Lila, don't do this to us. I shook my head, the last threads of my old guilt snapping. No, Mom, this is what you did to me. Now you're going to have to deal with it. Without another word, I turned and walked out, feeling a strange, bittersweet mixture of relief and heartbreak. They had shown me exactly where I stood, and for the first time, I was okay with letting go. As I stepped into the crisp afternoon air, I knew there was no going back. I had finally chosen myself. In the weeks that followed my final confrontation with my family, I felt an odd sense of weightlessness. I had expected guilt, doubt, maybe even regret. But instead, all I felt was relief, like I'd shed layers of responsibility that had been forced on me since I was a child. For the first time, I was truly free. My life was my own, and I was determined to keep it that way. At the diner, Luis noticed the shift in me. He didn't pry, he never did, but he'd started letting me experiment more in the kitchen, giving me the freedom to create dishes for the specials menu. I threw myself into it, spending extra hours after my shifts testing recipes, pouring all of my frustration and hope and everything I never had a chance to express into my food. Cooking had always been an escape, but now it was becoming a way to define myself, to put something of my own into the world. One night, Luis pulled me aside, holding a stack of tickets from a full dinner rush. You've been doing good work, Lila. Real good, he said, his gruff voice softening just slightly. Ever thought about culinary school? I blinked, caught off guard. Culinary school had always been a distant dream, something I'd put aside long ago, first for my family, then just to survive. I mean, yeah, I've thought about it, I said, brushing my hands on my apron, feeling a mix of excitement and doubt. But I don't think I could afford it. He gave me a steady look. There are scholarships, programs. You've got talent, Lila. Don't let that go to waste. His words lingered in my mind long after that night. The idea of pursuing something just for myself, something I loved, felt almost rebellious, like a luxury I'd never been allowed. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt right. It felt like a path I could walk without looking back, without the weight of anyone else's expectations. Over the next few months, I began looking into culinary schools, gathering information, researching programs, and even applying to a few in nearby cities. I was realistic. I didn't expect to get in immediately, and I knew I'd need a financial miracle to make it work. But just having the option, just knowing I was doing something for me, made all the difference. Around this time, I also grew closer to Sandra. She'd become my rock, someone who understood struggle, who knew what it was like to fight for every inch. We'd go out after shifts, grab a late dinner, or just talk about life over coffee. Her advice was blunt, honest, and exactly what I needed. You've spent your whole life living for other people, she said one night, stirring her coffee. Now, it's time to live for yourself. Hearing it from her made it feel even more real. I didn't have to be the caretaker anymore. I didn't have to be the person sacrificing for everyone else's dreams. I could finally be me, and no one could take that away. But just as I was beginning to feel settled, like I was really building a life that was mine, my family managed to find a way back in. It started with an unexpected phone call from my father. I stared at the screen, his name flashing, and felt a familiar pang of dread. Against my better judgment, I answered. Lila, he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. We need to talk. About what? I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as possible, bracing myself for the inevitable guilt trip. There was a pause, and I could hear him sigh heavily on the other end. It's about your mother. She hasn't been well. My chest tightened, and despite everything, a wave of concern washed over me. What's going on? She's been having heart issues, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The doctors are talking about surgery. It's serious. I felt myself falter, the anger I'd built up slipping away in the face of worry. Despite all the pain they'd caused me, Despite every betrayal, she was still my mother. I wanted to ask if they needed help, if there was anything I could do, but I bit back the words, knowing that opening that door, even a crack, would pull me right back in. I'm sorry to hear that. I managed, keeping my tone guarded. He hesitated, then continued, his voice softening into that pleading tone I knew too well. Lila, I know things haven't been easy between us, but maybe this could be a chance to put the past behind us. Your mother misses you. We all do. I closed my eyes, forcing back the rush of old memories and the painful pull of his words. Dad, I've moved on. I'm doing okay, and I can't go back to how things were. There was a long silence, then a soft, almost resigned sigh. Just think about it. If nothing else, for your mother's sake. I hung up, feeling a strange mix of anger and sorrow. Part of me wanted to run to the hospital, to sit by her side, to be the daughter they'd always expected me to be. But I knew that if I did, it would all start over. They'd pull me back in, twist my guilt, make me feel like the same helpless kid who'd always been there to fix everything for them. Still, the call left me shaken. I couldn't shake the image of my mother lying in a hospital bed, or the guilt gnawing at me for not being there. It took every ounce of strength to remind myself why I'd left, why I couldn't let them pull me back. The next day, I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the voices in my head, the doubts, the lingering guilt. But as much as I tried to push it down, the phone call lingered. I was quieter than usual, distracted, and even Luis noticed, giving me a concerned look as I worked my shift. After hours, Sandra pulled me aside, her gaze serious. What's going on? You've been out of it all day. I hesitated, then told her about the call, about my mother's health, and the pull I felt to go back, even though I knew it would destroy everything I'd built. She listened, nodding thoughtfully, and when I finished, she placed a hand on my shoulder. Listen, Lila, I'm not going to tell you what to do, she said. But I know one thing. Going back to them won't change who they are. They're only reaching out because they need something. They always need something. I nodded, knowing she was right. I had worked so hard to carve out a life of my own, to break free from the role they'd forced me into. Going back, even for a moment, would erase all of that. But the guilt still gnawed at me, making it impossible to sleep, to focus, to feel the peace I'd fought so hard to find. Days passed, and I tried to stay busy, throwing myself deeper into my culinary school applications, even picking up extra shifts to keep myself occupied. But every time my phone rang, my heart leapt, half expecting it to be my father with more bad news, or worse, with some plea that would finally break my resolve. Then, one evening after a long shift, I came home to find a letter slipped under my door. The handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's. I opened it slowly, dread pooling in my stomach as I read her words. Lila, we know you're hurting, and we know we haven't been the family you deserved. But please come back just for a little while. I'm scared, and I want my daughter with me. I want to make things right. Love, Mom. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the letter, feeling the pull of her words, the deep-rooted longing for the family I'd always dreamed of. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that maybe this time they meant it, that maybe this time they were ready to see me, to value me for who I was. But deep down, I knew better. I knew that as soon as I stepped back into their lives, the old patterns would resurface, the demands, the expectations, the sacrifices. I'd be right back where I started, the reliable daughter, the quiet supporter, the one who gave without ever receiving. I crumpled the letter in my hand, feeling a surge of anger and determination rise within me. I had built a life here, a real life, one where I was finally free to be myself, to chase my own dreams without someone else's expectations weighing me down. I wouldn't give that up, not for anything. As I stood there, breathing heavily, I knew what I had to do. I would hold my ground, keep the boundaries I'd set, no matter how much it hurt. I would choose myself just this once. And as hard as it was, I knew it was the only way to truly be free. In the days after receiving my mother's letter, I felt like I was standing on the edge of two worlds, one pulling me back into the past, and the other urging me forward into a future I'd finally started to build. I tried to push the letter out of my mind, focus on my work, my friends, my plans for culinary school. But every time I thought I'd put it behind me, her words came back, soft but insistent, tugging at some part of me that I'd tried to bury. I wanted to believe her, to believe that my family could finally see me, that they were ready to change. But the years of being overlooked, used, taken for granted, those memories weighed heavier than any words she could write. Then, just as I was starting to feel steady again, I received another message, this time from Eric. He'd kept his distance after I left, only reaching out sporadically, always with some vague apology for the misunderstanding about my college fund. But this message wasn't apologetic. It was desperate. He needed my help, he said, and he wasn't asking for much. Just a little money to get him through a rough patch. He insisted that things would get better soon, that he was close to a breakthrough, that this was his big chance. As I read his words, I could practically hear his voice, smooth and persuasive, the same tone he'd used every time he'd charmed our parents into giving him another chance. I put the message down, feeling a wave of exhaustion settle over me. I didn't want to answer, didn't want to give him the satisfaction of thinking he could still tug at my strings. But the thought of leaving things unresolved gnawed at me like a wound that would never heal. Against my better judgment, I typed a quick response, telling him that I was done, that I'd moved on, that he needed to take responsibility for himself. It was short, maybe a little harsher than I'd meant, but I needed him to understand that I wasn't his backup plan anymore. For a few days, things were quiet, and I started to think that maybe, finally, they'd leave me alone. But then, one afternoon as I was finishing up at work, my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, wondering if I should just ignore it, but something made me pick up. "Lila?" A woman's voice said, uncertain but familiar. "Yes, this is Lila." I replied, my heart racing as I recognized the voice. It was Lisa, my cousin, who I hadn't spoken to in years. She'd always been a little on the outskirts of our family, never fully involved in the drama, but close enough to know all the details. Hearing her voice brought back a flood of memories, some good, some painful. "I'm sorry to call you out of the blue," she said, her voice soft. "I know things have been complicated with the family, but I thought you should know things are bad. Really bad." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a pang of worry despite myself. "It's your mom," she continued, her tone grave. "The surgery was more serious than they expected. She's in recovery now, but she's weak. They're struggling, Lila. They really need you." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell her that they'd forfeited any right to my help the moment they'd taken everything I had without a second thought. But another part of me, the part that still remembered family dinners, birthdays, holidays spent together, couldn't ignore the pain in Lisa's voice. "Are you saying they're asking for me?" I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, then sighed. "They're too proud to ask outright. But they talk about you all the time. Your dad won't admit it, but he's a mess. They're in over their heads, financially and emotionally. They need someone who can hold things together." Hold things together. It was always the same story, wasn't it? I was the glue, the one who kept everything from falling apart. Even after everything they'd done, they still expected me to be there, to put my life on hold to fix their messes. But the thought of my mother, lying in a hospital bed, fragile and alone, was a hard image to shake. "Thanks for letting me know, Lisa," I said finally, unsure what else to say. "Of course," she replied, her voice softening. "I know they haven't been fair to you, but sometimes family is complicated." "Yeah," I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. "It sure is." After I hung up, I stood in the empty kitchen, staring at my phone, feeling a storm of emotions I couldn't even begin to sort through. Part of me wanted to ignore everything, to let them deal with the consequences of their choices, to stay firm in the boundaries I'd set. But another part of me, The part that had always longed for a family that would see me, that would appreciate me, couldn't quite let go of the hope that maybe this time would be different. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, replaying every argument, every slight, every betrayal, but also every tender memory, every moment when I'd felt, even briefly, like part of a family. By morning, I still hadn't made up my mind, but I knew I couldn't keep running from this. I needed to face them, to see for myself what had become of the family I'd left behind. I took a few days off work, telling Luis that I had some personal business to take care of. He didn't press, just nodded with a look of understanding. Sandra, of course, had a lot more to say. Are you sure about this? She asked, her expression a mix of worry and skepticism. You've worked so hard to get here, Lila. Don't let them pull you back in. I know, I replied, trying to sound more certain than I felt. But I need to see them. I need to know if there's anything left worth saving. She sighed, giving me a hug that was stronger than her small frame would suggest. Just don't forget who you are now, okay? You don't owe them anything. I promised her I wouldn't, but as I boarded the bus back to my hometown, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping back into a part of my life I'd tried so hard to escape. The town looked the same, the familiar streets and buildings, each one holding memories that felt both distant and painfully close. When I reached my parents' house, I paused at the front door, my heart pounding. It felt surreal, standing there again after all this time, knowing that behind this door were the people who had shaped so much of my life, for better or worse. I knocked, and a moment later, my father opened the door. His face was drawn, tired, and for the first time, he looked older, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. Lila, he said, his voice cracking slightly. You came. I nodded, stepping inside, feeling a strange mix of familiarity and discomfort as I took in the house that had once been my whole world. My mother was sitting in the living room, looking frail and pale, her usual spark dimmed. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filling with tears. Lila, sweetheart, she murmured, reaching out a trembling hand. I hesitated, then took her hand, feeling a pang of sadness as I saw how weak she was. Mom, I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. I heard you weren't well. She nodded, her eyes full of regret. I'm so sorry, Lila, for everything. I know we weren't fair to you. Hearing those words, the apology I'd longed for should have felt like vindication, like the closure I'd needed. But instead, it felt hollow, like an echo of something that had already been lost. I squeezed her hand, not trusting myself to speak. Over the next few days, I stayed with them, helping out around the house, taking care of my mom, and doing what I could to ease the burden they'd created. Eric was around, but he kept his distance, barely acknowledging me except to make a few half-hearted attempts at conversation. It was clear that he still saw himself as the center of the family, the one they would always choose no matter what. One evening, my father pulled me aside, his expression serious. Lila, we're in a rough spot financially, he admitted, looking away. With your mom's medical bills and everything else, we're barely holding on. I felt a surge of frustration, the old resentment rising up again. They had made their choices, poured everything into Eric, left me with nothing, and now they were expecting me to fix it all, as if I hadn't already given them everything I had. I understand, I said, keeping my tone neutral, but I can't solve this for you. I have my own life now, my own responsibilities. He looked down, defeated, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. We know, Lila, and we're sorry. We didn't realize how much we'd taken from you. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of closure, like a door was finally closing on the life I'd left behind. As I prepared to leave, my mother hugged me tightly, whispering, I hope you find happiness, Lila. You deserve it. As I stepped out of that house, I felt a weight lift, a sense of finality that I'd never felt before. I had done what I could, but I knew now that I couldn't save them, couldn't fix the brokenness that had defined our family for so long. And for the first time, I was okay with that. I was ready to move forward, to build a life that was truly mine, unburdened by the past. When I returned to my apartment after spending those last few days with my family, I felt a mix of exhaustion and clarity that I hadn't expected. The entire experience had felt surreal, like visiting a distant past that no longer held me the way it once had. I'd gone back, given them my time, faced their struggles, and in the end, it had been exactly what I needed to finally let go. It was strange, though, this new kind of silence. In the past, any quiet moment would have been filled with old regrets, voices from my family echoing in my mind, reminding me of everything I should have been doing for them. Now, there was just space. I'd never known what it was like to have my life fully to myself. I hadn't realized just how much of my identity had been wrapped up in being the daughter who sacrificed, the sister who always came through. The next day, I walked into the diner feeling lighter, like I was shedding old skin, leaving pieces of my past scattered behind me. Luis was in the kitchen, barking out orders in his usual gruff way, but when he saw me, he nodded, a small smile breaking through his hard exterior. "Good to have you back," he said, with a rare warmth that made me smile. "Good to be back," I replied, grabbing my apron and tying it around my waist. The familiar routine of prepping ingredients, the sharp smell of garlic, onions, and herbs, the rhythm of chopping and stirring, all of it felt like a balm, grounding me back in the life I'd chosen. For myself, I was in my element here, where every movement was my own, every dish I created a product of my own hands. It was different from family obligations. Here, I wasn't anyone's savior or fixer. I was just Lila, a woman who worked hard, who took pride in her craft, who was building a life on her terms. Over the following weeks, I immersed myself in the kitchen even more. Luis continued to give me opportunities to experiment, to create new specials, and even hinted that he'd talk to the diner owner about giving me a small percentage of the earnings from the dishes I created. It wasn't much, but it felt like the start of something bigger, something that was mine alone. One evening, as I was cleaning up after a long shift, Luis approached me, holding a manila envelope. He handed it to me without a word, just a nod that told me he'd done something more than just watch me work. Inside was a brochure from a culinary institute and an application form. I looked up at him, my heart pounding. "I took the liberty," he said, shrugging as if it were nothing. "You've got talent, Lila. I'd hate to see it go to waste." I stared at the brochure, feeling a rush of gratitude and excitement I hadn't felt in years. Culinary school had always been a distant dream, something I'd never thought I could reach. But here it was, almost within my grasp, like a door cracking open just enough for me to see the possibilities on the other side. "Thank you, Luis," I managed, my voice catching. "I don't know if I'd even have thought about this without you." He shrugged again, his usual gruff expression softening. "You've got more strength than you think. Just don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As he walked away, I clutched the envelope, feeling a sense of purpose surging through me. This was my chance to build something for myself, to create a future that wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations or demands. I could finally be more than just the daughter who sacrificed. I could be a chef, an artist in my own right. I went home that night and filled out the application, my hands shaking with a mixture of fear and excitement. I'd come so far already, rebuilt my life from the ground up, but this felt like the next step, a leap into a world I'd only dreamed of. Over the next few days, I sent off the application and waited, pouring all my energy into my work at the diner. Sandra was thrilled when I told her, cheering me on with a grin that made me feel like I was doing something truly worth celebrating. "You're going places, Lila," she said one night as we sat in our usual coffee shop. "I always knew you would. You've got too much fire in you to stay in one place." I laughed, feeling warmth spread through me. Here's hoping someone at that school sees it too. For the first time in my life, I felt like my future was unfolding on a path I'd chosen, not one that had been chosen for me. It was liberating, exhilarating, like breathing air I'd never realized I needed. Then one evening after work, just as I was beginning to feel steady, my phone buzzed with another message from my family. I almost didn't check it, half tempted to just delete it without reading. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it, bracing myself for whatever would come next. It was from my father. Lila, I don't know if you'll respond, but things have been hard. Your mom's still recovering, and Eric, well, he's in deeper trouble than we thought. We could really use your help. Just a small loan to get us through. I stared at the message, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Even after everything, after all the boundaries I'd tried to set, they still saw me as the solution to their problems. My mother's health, Eric's financial troubles, all of it was on my shoulders again, like a shadow I couldn't escape. For a moment, the old instinct kicked in, the urge to fix things, to be the dependable one. But then I remembered the long nights, the sacrifices, the way they'd stolen my future without a second thought. I had given them everything I had, and it had never been enough. I took a deep breath, then typed a response, each word feeling like a brick in the wall I was finally building around myself. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. I have my own life now, my own dreams. I wish you all the best, but I'm done sacrificing my future for your mistakes. I hit send before I could second guess myself, feeling a mixture of fear and freedom as I watched the message disappear. It felt final, like closing a chapter that had haunted me for too long. In the days that followed, I threw myself even deeper into my work, focusing on every detail, every dish, as if I could cook away the lingering guilt, the residual pain of breaking away. I reminded myself of everything I'd built, the friends I'd made, the future I was crafting, and slowly, the pain began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength I hadn't known I had. One afternoon, as I was prepping for the dinner rush, I received an email from the culinary school. My hands shook as I opened it, barely able to breathe as I scanned the words. I had been accepted, with a partial scholarship, enough to make the dream almost within reach. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, tears stinging my eyes as I read the letter over and over, barely able to believe it was real. I was going to culinary school. I was finally going to be more than the girl who held everyone else together. That night, I celebrated with Sandra, laughing and toasting to a future that felt brighter than anything I'd ever imagined. We talked about my plans, the classes I'd take, the dishes I'd create, and for the first time, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a life that was truly mine. The next day, I handed in my notice at the diner. Luis congratulated me, clapping me on the back with a proud smile that made me feel like I was leaving not just a job, but a family. He made me promise to visit, to keep him updated on my progress. And as I left, I knew that I'd carry his support with me wherever I went. As I packed my bags, preparing to move to a new city, to start fresh in a place where no one knew me, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I wasn't running away this time. I was running towards something that was mine and mine alone. When I boarded the bus, leaving behind the town that had once been my whole world, I didn't look back. I had spent too long carrying everyone else's dreams, sacrificing my own future for people who had never seen me for who I was. Now I was free, ready to build a life that was truly mine, a life that I could be proud of. As the city's skyline faded in the distance, I felt a quiet resolve settle within me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that whatever it was, I would face it on my own terms, unburdened by the past. For the first time, I was truly free, and that freedom tasted sweeter than anything I could have ever imagined. Arriving in the new city felt like stepping into another life, one that I had imagined 1,000 times, but never fully believed I'd live. Everything was unfamiliar, from the crispness in the air to the towering buildings and bustling sidewalks. I stood at the edge of the campus, clutching my bag, and took in the sight of the Culinary Institute that I had only seen in brochures and online tours. This was it. The dream was real, right in front of me, waiting for me to make it my own. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. Classes started early and ended late, with each day packed full of lessons, hands-on practice, and critiques that came fast and merciless. I loved every minute of it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Every technique I learned, every recipe I mastered, felt like a small victory, a testament to the person I had become. My classmates were talented, driven, each one brimming with their own unique style and ambition. We were all different, but we shared a passion that connected us, made us a sort of family, one built on shared experiences and dreams rather than obligation. I made a few close friends, people who supported me, who saw me as Lila, the budding chef, and nothing more. I didn't have to carry anyone else's expectations here. I was free to just be. In the evenings, I would practice on my own, staying late in the school kitchen after everyone else had gone home. There was something calming about the solitude, the quiet focus as I worked on perfecting my dishes, tweaking recipes until they were exactly right. Every late night, every blistered finger, every burn felt worth it. This was my world now, and I was determined to make it my own. Then, one night, as I was packing up to leave the kitchen, my phone buzzed with a notification. I glanced down, seeing a message from a number I had long since deleted. It was Eric. My heart sank, a cold dread settling over me. I hadn't heard from him or anyone else in the family since I'd left for culinary school. I hadn't expected to either. I had thought I'd finally moved past that chapter. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the message, bracing myself for whatever excuse, plea, or accusation was waiting. The message was short, almost cryptic. I messed up, Lila. I don't know what to do. I'm out of options. Please help me. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. It was the same old story. Eric, back with his problems, expecting me to be the one to pick up the pieces. But this time was different. I was no longer the girl who would drop everything to save him, to fix things for a family that had never given me the same consideration. I was here, living my life, achieving something for myself. I wouldn't, let him drag me back into the chaos. I set the phone down, determined not to reply, and packed up my things. But as I walked back to my tiny apartment, the message lingered in my mind. A part of me still felt the old pull, the instinct to help, to be the dependable one. I hated that it was still there, that after all this time I still cared. I tried to shake it off, to focus on the life I was building, but it wasn't that simple. Family ties, no matter how frayed, are hard to sever. Over the next few days, I threw myself into my work, focusing on my classes, pushing myself harder than ever. I practiced late into the night, determined to prove, if only to myself, that I didn't need them, that I was strong enough to stand on my own. But the message from Eric gnawed at me, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind, reminding me of the past I'd tried so hard to leave behind. Finally, one evening, after another long day in the kitchen, I sat down and drafted a reply. I kept it brief, direct. Eric, I can't help you. I'm sorry for whatever you're going through, but I'm living my own life now. I hope you find your way. I sent the message, feeling the pang of finality, as if I were closing the door I had left ajar for too long. His response came almost immediately. I knew you'd abandon us, Lila. You always thought you were too good for this family. I stared at the words, feeling a surge of anger and hurt that I hadn't expected. After everything I had done, after all the sacrifices, he still saw me as the problem, as the one who had turned my back on them. It was like he was determined to make me feel guilty, to pull me back into that old role of the scapegoat, the fixer. But I couldn't let him. Not anymore. I put my phone away, took a deep breath, and reminded myself why I was here. I had made it to culinary school, against all odds, on my own terms. I was finally living a life that was mine, unburdened by the expectations and needs of others. I couldn't let Eric or anyone else take that from me. The next few months flew by in a blur. I poured everything I had into my studies, staying focused, driven, determined to make the most of this opportunity. My instructors noticed my dedication, and one of them, Chef Margot, even pulled me aside after a particularly intense class. Lila, she said, her eyes sharp and assessing. You have something special. A resilience, a fire. Keep nurturing it and you'll go far. Her words meant more to me than I could say. I had spent so much of my life being told to dim my light, to put others first. Here, in this place, I was finally being seen for who I was, encouraged to shine. It was everything I had fought for, everything I had dreamed of. By the end of my first year, I had earned a reputation as one of the most promising students in the program. I had found my voice in the kitchen, developed my own style, and started to envision a future that I could call my own. I no longer felt the pull of my past, the weight of old expectations. I was free, finally, truly free. And then one day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my mother. I hesitated, holding the envelope in my hands, feeling a mixture of curiosity and dread. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to leave it unread, to keep that door firmly closed. But another part of me, the part that still held on to the faint hope of family, compelled me to open it. The letter was short, written in my mother's neat, careful handwriting. Lila, I know you've moved on, and I don't blame you. I wish things had been different, that we had been better parents to you. But please know that I am proud of you. I hope you find the happiness you deserve. Love, Mom. I read the letter over and over, feeling a strange sense of closure settle over me. For years, I had longed for their approval, for some acknowledgement of the sacrifices I had made. And here it was, in her own words, a quiet apology, a simple wish for my happiness. I folded the letter carefully, placing it in a drawer, and sat in silence for a long time. The past would always be a part of me, a part of my story, but it no longer held me. I had found my own path, built my own life, and in that life, I was whole. As I moved forward, my family became a distant memory, a chapter that had shaped me but no longer defined me. I was ready for whatever the future held, unburdened by the weight of old expectations, free to be exactly who I was meant to be.